I'd like to obviously start by thanking Daniel for organizing this incredible event, um, and to thank all of those who have made it possible for all of us to be here today. Meeting Daniel only a few months ago in Germany at a symposium, I've been incredibly impressed with his body of work, and certainly this event, which is indeed a trifecta in terms of contribution as I see it. One, sort of offering the history of computation with his book, the discourse that will inevitably come out of this weekend, and also offering a platform for new work that begins to imagine what's next. And I have been given the not so easy task, to kick all of this off this weekend. So also thank you for that. But with that, I will begin. Obviously, maybe I should just say that I am Kristy Balliet. I am one half of Bear Balliet. I will get back to that in a moment. But for today, we've been asked to be a part of the panel Software Comes to Matter. And I also have enjoyed Daniel's prompt that we've been asked to keep a focus on the visual, and to do a close reading, or even better, an extended caption. So I will just immediately start with a few images as a means to set up our project that we've entitled endearingly G.L.O. It's an acronym for the graphic, line, and object, and we will start here. So for my partner and I, as I indicated, I'm one half of Bear Balliet. We brought two main issues that have been floating around our office to bear on this project. One is a continuing interest in the collapse of the drawing and the model, to flicker between the two, that drawings can be models, and you can model drawings. We do this by we've done this in various ways, by embedding drawings in models, by putting drawings on models, while also constructing models that lean on drawing conventions and perceptual bias. For example, this project for the Venice Biennale, where we decided early on that we would lean on the modeling of a drawing, in this case, the elevation, the building elevation drawing. But of course, the model, as you move closer to it, it moves less away from a drawing and moves closer to a physical model. So this interest for us in kind of drawing a means to associate the output of sort of a two-dimensional image, a three-dimensional model, is something that we really took on to engage this topic of designing the computational image. The second major issue that we brought into this project is our kind of recent interest in line as a medium. So by that, I mean a thing to be worked on, an object that can have qualities that can transcend its typical role of communicating and describing another object. But in this case, the line itself could take on qualities beyond that role, in addition, and add additional aspects to that role. And we've been working on this renewed interest on the line, specifically within virtual reality, and its ability to assist with interrogating the image. So in this case, I mean image in the way that image is sort of a likeness or a representation of a thing, but not necessarily the thing itself. And so I think you can kind of see by that setup, there's kind of a contradiction, sort of a flickering between the line being an object itself and also working to represent something else, and trying to get that wrestling, that visual tension and that wrestling to be more apparent. So I guess to wrap up this extended caption, I would just say that we are coming at this prompt as designers, and we took on the prompt for the computational image through the idea to have a composition of three modeled drawings. We looked to objects that had various relationships to the wall, to kind of expand the idea of the drawing being on the wall. And so as we looked at various objects with relationships to walls, we ended up settling on three objects. One, the shelf, that depending on where and how it sits in a room can be seen as a line or a grid, etc. The second being the plaque, often something that holds something else. For example, in the case of kind of mounted antlers, for example, the antlers themselves can be a type of sort of three-dimensional drawing. And finally, the third element that we designed was sort of based on a tapestry, and that relationship to the wall being sort of a compilation of thick, matted density of lines. So I'm just going to flip through. In some ways, we see this as a set of three things, but we also sort of see it as a compilation of sort of a singular image that's working through producing a likeness of things. So to move, let's say, to the B side or the behind the scenes of this talk, I have organized this kind of brief setup for what will become, I think, a more robust conversation in three parts. One is software comes to matter, or how I've kind of been thinking about it in terms of speculations on matter. Two will be a brief discussion on sort of a positioning on something we've been calling loud lines. And then I will wrap up by looking at the project G.L.O in a bit more detail. And so to move into sort of software comes to matter, I would say that our relationship within the office on software focuses more on matter as designers. We use and exploit software, sometimes robustly, sometimes naively, and sometimes we intentionally bracket our engagement to a particular software in order to sort of produce a range of output. And so I would say, while software is critical to compute the relationship of motion and geometry, particularly in the project I'm going to show today, we have most often, we are more engaged with, and intentionally for this project, has spent more labor on the translation into matter. And so while this is not a building, it's absolutely sort of more of kind of a working project within the office that we use this prompt to develop. We sort of see the translation into a built artifact as sort of the major priority. And so I guess I would just say before, I'm only going to show G.L.O today, so I'm not showing the other body of work from our office, except for this sort of small glimpse here, which is just to sort of set up a design sensibility that I believe is emerging in the kind of collaboration with my partner that is, let's say, in its toddler stage. We're about 2 years in. And so Balliet was very much founded on the unlikely friendship between the architectural profile and architectural volume. And though it has developed shifting interest from profile to line, that I'll talk about today, and also from volume to loud, more of an attitude, these new terms have expanded our earlier disciplinary interests and directed us towards more unusual mediums, and perhaps more importantly, prompted us to consider the potential of 2 and 3 dimensions coexisting in a flickering world of expansive definition and oscillating resolution. So the role of representation in medium in both our design work and our teaching is something we discuss and revisit often. So it is not strange that when Daniel asked us to think about designing the computational image and participating in the show, we took it as an opportunity to take a focused look at the emerging role of virtual reality. And by focused, I mean we were less interested in getting lost in the immersive environments that it provides, and more interested in the bracketed role of the drawn line within a zero-gravity environment. We see the gestural line as another way to expand the relationship between profile and volume. And here the line can be understood as both flat and full. And I would say, just as a sort of side note, because both my partner and I teach and practice, this work on the line and related to virtual reality is standing side by side with a course that I'm currently teaching at SciArc entitled The Animate Line, and that I co-teach with Casey Ream. And that this recent visualization research is primarily using virtual reality as a tool for drawing in this specific three-dimensional environment. These qualities rethink the architectural conventions of drawings as line weights shift mid-stroke, various thicknesses merge at vertices to produce odd knuckles at moments where a line changes direction, and the traditional ways in which one views orthographic drawing is challenged. Part 2 is entitled, although it says 3 there, is entitled Loud Lines. And this recent label has been bouncing around the office more as sort of an overarching kind of aesthetic, and also what we would sort of describe as a general attitude. To us, loud lines is a descriptor that embodies many qualities we associate and value in architecture. Loud lines appeal for attention. They are disciplined and bold. Loud lines are structured but have the capacity to waver, splinter, and stutter. In short, loud lines can misbehave. Loud lines are not mute, and they are not indifferent. The territory we are defining and aim to linger within is an evolving mix of discipline with the intention to act up. Loud lines belong to the discipline, but they imply a rethinking or loosening of how they operate and the standards they follow. So let's take a look at a few examples of how line and gesture have crossed paths in the past. Certainly, again, I'll just remind you, I'm coming at this as a designer and not a historian in this context. So this is quite a roller coaster ride with a few references on sort of the convergence of the line and the gesture as we see it. But certainly, we could think of the spline as a tool. We could think of the stroke as a sketch. We could think of the human gesture as just a few of the many, many ways that architects have used line to communicate qualities, and qualities beyond its role to give instruction to building. And certainly virtual reality and the work within it allows for the expansion of the line within architecture beyond something that references things to come or supports a surface that will be, and begins to acknowledge and define qualities of the line on its own, as it inherently has geometry assigned to it as soon as you kind of produce it in this sort of zero gravity environment. But we could also just say that sort of the interest in virtual reality for various people is just another way to get the architect back inside. And I think that's something that's of interest. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but and again, not a historian, but of course, throughout history, others have studied the line and its relevance, use to define the discipline. In this case, of course, the allegorical primitive hut. Here, lines found in nature illustrate what Ratchye saw as the elements of architecture: the column, the entablature, and the pediment. Or if we speed ahead with me, more recently, Eero Saarinen using iconic curves to define structure, edge, and overall profile. In Saarinen's TWA terminal, I would say my interest, at least in this line of work, is his prioritizing of the line, I would say over surface, both in terms of the geometry and in the aesthetic. And of course, today there are other colleagues who are finding momentum in the line. They too are working adjacent to the discipline, but with a clear ambition to misbehave. For example, Greg Lynn's Slavin House from 2009, here rethinking the line and the relationship to structure and surface. Or Lucy McRae and Bart Hess's 2012 collaboration, here the line is the complete enclosure, so thick and dense that it is both line and surface. And finally, a colleague of mine, Andrew Zago's 2016 project for the Venice Biennale, detaches the line completely from its role in structure or enclosure. Here, the qualities of the doodle are part of the aesthetic of the end work. So lines as a medium in architecture, again, something to be worked on, are associated with rhythmic repetition, erratic character, structural integrity, whimsical moments, and elegant form. In short, they can fall in line and misbehave in the blink of an eye. For the actual third and final setup for my contribution to this discussion would be to take a kind of a closer look at the specific work that was produced for this exhibition. And so mining several ways in which an architect works on the disciplinary line, problem of the line, the three-dimensional projection, line weight, and type to communicate hierarchy, and simultaneously looking at multi-perspectivity, viewing an orthogonal floor plan and a perspective at the same time, etc. This project proposes 3 ways to turn up the volume online. So again, this project is entitled G.L.O, or the Graphic Line and Object, and it is in response to Daniel's prompt that went initially something like this. My hope is that you would be interested in showcasing some of your work. Coming to mind are computer-generated drawings on the more speculative side of your practice. And so I would say we took that prompt and we thank you for offering it to us, because we sort of took on this project this summer as an outlier within the office, and it means to sort of really speculate on how my partner and I, 2 people who were educated and now practice sort of straddling the digital turn, think about 15, 20 years in to this realm of architecture, how we view the computational image as designers. And so I think initially when I got this, a computer-generated drawing to me, and I'm sure everyone has their initial reaction is very different, but mine is like it's like a beautiful line drawing in the wall that is just embedded with like excessive amounts of information that just makes me want to get lost in the excess of information and graphic and the territory that one drawing is trying to hold. And so I think somehow you have to remember we took this on as sort of an outlier. So we also took it on as a way to kind of contradict or take a kind of an opposing position of how we usually think of that aesthetic. Closer. Yes, perfect. And so I would just say that last part again, that we took on that prompt of the computer-generated drawings to sort of challenge even our own sort of assumptions and aesthetics that we traditionally have assigned to that within our own practice. And so, looking here, this is not an excessive amount of lines. It is not an incredibly elegant drawing that is framed and ready to be put up on the wall. Instead, this is what we shipped off. We found the setup, designing the computational image, imaging the computational design, a productive zone of inquiry because of the requested and prompted relationship between design and representation. The exhibition title elicits questions about design of artifacts and the role of software to define a new type of image. In Daniel's words, an image no longer understood as a pictorial representation of a design, but rather as an operative artifact performing it. And so I would just like to give a small shout out here to my friend Stefan Gruber, who I haven't seen since our years in Vienna together, and who snuck in this gallery and sent me this picture before I was able to see it today. But I would just say that the project that we ended up shipping off and that we worked on this summer consists of a set of drawn models that explores the convergence of the virtual and physical realm of this drawn line that I've discussed. And the pieces expose and challenge the visual tensions and expectations associated with the evolution of the computational image. Our response to what is a computational image today is not a 2D computer-generated drawing that is the factual result of computational labor, while we love that, but instead an image rather that sets up a gap between what is and what could be. In other words, an image that provokes speculation, that doesn't have a clean link between material, intention, and design. It's all a bit loose. So again, our response to the prompt was to consider the thickening of the line and the role of the gesture and expressive intention combined with, let's say, kind of a dumb or reduced intellectual content. Both of these latter terms seem antithetical to the aesthetic output we associate typically with computational image, and we liked this. It is a project that considers the gestures associated with the drawing as a critical part of this computational project, but it leans heavily on known images that we were able to use to construct and form lines. So we managed these relations by designing a set of 3 physical models that reference the wall objects that I referred to earlier, a shelf, a plaque, and a tapestry, while alternating between 3 distinct parts, each one having a flat graphic, a thick line drawing, and an object. The role of what is modeled, drawn, and displayed is explored in virtual reality and adapted for the physical realities of the gallery. The shelf holds things, somewhat indifferent. The plaque displays things. It elevates the status of the line. And the tapestry or macrame reference embeds minimized elements or trinkets within it. And to take just a small step back for a moment to kind of look at the environment that the drawing was generated in. Again, I would just state that we have bracketed the move into virtual reality, not as a means to develop an environment, but rather to focus on the drawing of a known standard element with the loose casualness associated with gesture in a zero gravity environment. So the standards are recalled from memory or based on proportion and primary identifying qualities. This is meant to be the Malm shelf that we could all get at IKEA. And the line is used to define maximum qualities with minimal material. Consider things like the wireframe, the pipe, and the weave. And of course, kind of mobilizing the memory of image through a sketch is common practice. Developing this directly in 3D adds a slightly new aspect of that translation. And to kind of quote Robin Evans for a moment, a text from The Arrested Image, he says, "Our ideas about our own thinking and perception are dominated by vision, and our ideas about our own vision are defined by tacit references to pictures and projections." So if Evans was able to state quite some time ago that it is now possible to say that projection has leapt from the drawing board into the mind, where it has been installed as an element that aids the construction and maintenance of the thinking self as we know it, we have fabricated our subjectivity from manufactured parts that were the manifest evidence of constructive consciousness in the first place, the elements of geometry. This is a quote, that was a quote from Robin Evans. And again, with our speculation into VR, we are adding another dimension to the relation of the projection and perception. Now we'll just go through these last few images quite quickly to hopefully leave them in your mind as we move into the discussion. As we started each element, we started things like thinking about 12 ways to draw a shelf and thinking about things like what happens when you draw above you, in front of you, below you, how the proportions and extents of that image are changed in the kind of physical artifact that is produced. How do you get inside the thing that you're currently working on? And again, not necessarily inside in terms of an incredibly immersive environment, but more just to sort of move around these sort of minimal relationships of lines to understand it in many different ways. And then, of course, it's sort of move into the physical. Or in the case of the plaque, which holds a line or a pipe, the idea that just the simple gesture of trying to recall a pipe from memory produces, it produces a line that has many qualities embedded in it that I would say sort of translate its representation of a pipe or a line. And finally, I would say the third element of the idea of lines that are used in kind of weaving. So if we think of those lines in terms of the weft and waft, I mean, it becomes really interesting when you're in sort of the virtual environment in terms of what how much you respect the relationship that those lines usually have with one another, now that they obviously don't have the same physical constraints. But then finally selecting sort of one and pulling it back out through multiple softwares to begin to prepare it for physical fabrication. So I liked your introduction with the idea of kind of seams and seamlessness, right? The sort of move from the sort of design of seams to the ambition to sort of remove the trace of them. And so these are sort of a little closer looks at things. And I'm just going to conclude with the three sort of objects and context, sort of showing them with their graphic object and line, a detail image, each sort of plaque, its line, and the graphic that holds it. And the tapestry, which has qualities of materiality that vacillates between being hard and roughed, and sort of our association with it being sort of thick and soft. So in conclusion, I would say that this work that this prompt has allowed us to do is an amalgam of the object and the drawing as a response to designing the computational image. And I'll just leave you with a quote by Robin Evans, again, where he indicates that architecture, geometry, and pictures all bring together space along with them as a silent partner. Thank you.